Defining Renault's Twizy isn't easy. It has four wheels, but isn't really a car. There's space for two, but only one front seat. There's a roof, but it's open at the sides. And it'll match the flow of traffic, but won't use an engine to do so. This is Renault's electric technology at its most extreme, offering perhaps the ultimate answer for city motoring. Perhaps even the kind of second car that all future families should have. To be sustainable for the future of mankind, the automobile has to change. Maybe not change this much, but all the same, it has to change. This is Renault's Twizy, automotive transport, but not as we know it. The name is a supposed blend of the words two and easy, the badge for this innovative French brand solution to the issue of how people should get around their urban environment and complete the short, everyday one or two-person journeys we all make that, if we're honest, don't really require a proper car. You see, this isn't actually a proper car, even though it has four wheels and a steering wheel. Instead, it's really a cross between a scooter and a car, something the industry calls a heavy quadricycle, the term defining a four-wheel vehicle with a weight no more than 650 kilograms and a power output that's usually less than 20 brake horsepower. Not the kind of thing the average person would usually feel comfortable about driving. But is this? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Here we have the entry point for a range of electric vehicles in which Renault has invested over £2.5 billion. And it's certainly a varied one. The Super Mini Zoe for small families, the Fluence ZE for larger ones, and the Kangoo ZE van for eco-minded businesses. All these models must try and justify their existence as alternatives to ordinary combustion-engined alternatives. The Twizy's advantage is that it doesn't have to do so, for so unique, so outlandish is it, that no real conventional alternatives exist. So you'll either like it or you won't. One thing's for certain, our cities will be crammed with vehicles like this in a future that's likely to see electric cars account for more than 10% of the total world car market by the year 2020. But does this Renault make more sense than a city car or a scooter as urban-based second car transport right here, right now? Let's find out. You get a strange combination of emotions when first you slip behind the wheel. It does feel a little odd to be inserting a Clio key and grasping an old Laguna steering wheel in such a futuristic machine. And initially, at least, the fussy 4-point seatbelt feels very awkward and necessary to stop you sliding out of the side of the car. But stranger than all of that is the feeling that you get alone, scooter style up front, and the absolute silence that you get after apparently firing the Twizy into life. Well, not quite nothing. There's a rather apologetic beep and a green go light that illuminates to the left of the instrument oval ahead, indicating that you permission to activate the single-speed automatic gearbox by pressing the D button to the left of the steering wheel. Then it's just a case of releasing the umbrella-style handbrake, rather awkwardly situated beneath the fascia, and prodding the throttle to see if it'll creep forwards. Now, you actually need a boot full of throttle to activate meaningful forward motion, but once your right foot's firmly planted, the Twizy displays the usual all-electric vehicle feeling of up-and-atom performance, as all 57 newton meters of torque are delivered to the tarmac in one fell swoop, firing you from rest to 30 miles an hour in around 6 seconds, which isn't bad given that the electric motor generates just 17 braked horses. But then it doesn't need much power to punt this little thing along, given that the curb weight is just 475 kilograms. That's around half the figure of a normal city car. Around 100 kilograms of that is accounted for by the 6 kilowatt lithium-ion battery that powers the AC motor, The battery centrally mounted and placed low down to skim along a few inches above the road surface and provide the low centre of gravity that makes this machine such fun to punt around the twisty stuff, and compensates for the tall, narrow shape that really ought to make this vehicle most unstable around corners. Now, credit for the fact that it isn't goes to the enthusiasts at Renault Sport, who supervised the handling and lent their Formula One expertise to the regenerative battery system that charges the battery whenever you come off the throttle. Not that you often do. This thing is so much fun to drive that the temptation is to throw it around at max chat almost everywhere, or at least as much at max chat as the 50 mile an hour top speed will allow, which isn't of course the cleverest thing to do if you want to maximise the necessarily rather meagre operating range of around 60 miles. Now, I'm not quite sure how that figure was arrived at, because I've never ever seen anything approaching that during my time with this car. 30, maybe edging up towards 40 miles is a better estimate. Still, that'd be more than enough for most urban commutes. This is real motoring in the raw. You wouldn't expect traction or stability control at this price point, maybe not even anti-lock brakes. But it's a bit of a shock to find that those anchors aren't even servo assisted, and that you have to do without power steering. Actually, the braking thing isn't too much of a problem. There's so little weight in a Twizy that the pads supplied do a very respectable job of bringing the machine to a halt. The steering's more of an issue, rather heavier than you would ideally want in a town car. But compensation comes in the way that this Renault is so brilliantly manoeuvrable. It's got a curb-to-curb turning circle of just 6.8 metres. If you can't park this thing, you really need to give up now. Get yourself a push bike instead. The narrowness, this car's just 1.24 metres wide, is one reason for this. It's not much wider than a motorbike. But while scooter riders can nip outside stationary streams of traffic, this Twizy is a bit too wide for that kind of stunt. So if you're in a jam, you'll stay stuck there like everyone else, just without your own air conditioning, your own music and protection from the elements. And the suspension? Well, let's just say it's a bit on the firm side. I've learnt to dread potholes and speed humps. Clearly the designers felt that there needed to be some sort of trade-off between ride quality and body composure. But for an urban vehicle, there'd be many, myself included, that feel that this Twizy is still a bit too unyielding. But that's not what I've remembered from my time in this car. More to stick in my mind is this feeling of openness that it gives you, even with these optional doors in place. Zip along a country lane and you'll be able to feel the sun on your skin, pick up snippets of passing conversations, smell the wood smoke and the cut grass. Of course, at the same time, you'll also be very often exposed to the worst of British weather, as well as sights and sounds in an urban environment that aren't quite so pleasant. And in case you're wondering, yes, you could drive a Renault Twizy on a British motorway, as long as you hold a full driving licence. You probably wouldn't want to, though. In fact, the only time you're going to want to drive this car further than about 15 miles is if your destination will have somewhere to charge the thing, a process that'll take around 3.5 hours from a normal 220 volt 10 amp domestic or workplace socket. Just long enough if you're visiting friends to have a leisurely French-style repast. That's providing that you're comfortable with charging up your car on somebody else's bill. Now, I might not be, to be honest. Renault calls it hidden hospitality. But for me, out and about charging is far more likely to take place at a public charging point like this. Now, you'll be able to use places like this as often as you want, provided you get yourself an affordable charge card from your local council for a fee that'll probably cover the electricity you'll be using. The Twizy styling looks like nothing we've ever seen before. The wheels flung out at each corner, the two seats in tandem, the wedge-shaped passenger cell that sits nestled down into the chassis. All of it marks this Renault out as something resolutely unconventional. Getting in is relatively straightforward. This car's got the optional flip-up doors fitted, and they're almost fingertip light on their gas struts. But even when they're down, they only cover half the door height, partly explaining why once you're behind the wheel you've got a rather odd twin seatbelt arrangement to contend with. The first is a normal diagonal inertia reel belt, but the second loops over your right hand shoulder. If there was no door here, then it would prevent you from sliding out to the side. At first you feel trussed up like a Christmas turkey, but after a while you stop noticing it. Thanks to a decent amount of front headroom and plenty of fore and aft adjustment on the driver's seat, the driving position is comfortable, despite the fact that the wheel is fixed into position. Through it you view a clear and simple digital instrumentation display with figures for speed, range and also a battery charge indicator. There are only three main buttons, all grouped to the left of the steering wheel: the hazard flashers, and then the two buttons that respectively are either for drive or reverse on the auto gearbox. Pressing them together gives you neutral. Forward visibility is very good, but the lack of a rear glazed panel seems odd, explaining why Renault feels the need to offer optional parking sensors on something this small. If, like most buyers, you pay extra for these flip-up doors, they'll come mounted with door mirrors that would otherwise be attached to the chassis frame instead. Behind the driver, the single seat with its ordinary three-point belt is fixed into a single position and requires a certain nimbleness of limb when it comes to getting in and out. Once in situ, it's necessary to sit with your legs splayed either side of the driver in front, which is actually a lot more comfortable than it sounds. Indeed, when it comes to seating, say, a 6-footer, an adult of that size would probably be more comfortable in this 2.3 metre long Twizy than they would in, say, a 4.5 metre long Ford Focus, because you don't have this seat back knee room issue that you would in a normal conventional car. Renault has done a pretty good job in making this Twizy a relatively practical proposition. There are two glove boxes built into the dash, and one of them's lockable. And here at the rear, you've got a lockable 31-litre storage compartment, which can easily take a change of clothes or a set of waterproofs. You can also specify a storage net and a 50-litre rear storage bag to go here. So this Renault might even be a sensible proposition for a relatively restrained weekly shop, provided you don't mind doing it on your own. Assessing the Twizy's value proposition is rather awkward. After all, what do you compare it to? Probably the Smart 4.2 electric drive is this model's only conceivable competitor. But even there you're talking about something far more car-like, which will cost you a good few £1,000s more. Now, asking prices for this Renault are hobbled by the fact that, rather unfairly, and unlike Renault's other ZE electric vehicles, this doesn't qualify for the government's £5,000 PICG plug-in electric car grant. Even so, the asking prices seem pretty affordable, starting from just under £7,000 and ranging up to just under £8,000, depending on the trim level that you choose. And that seems pretty good value when you consider that a high-end electric scooter like a Vectrix VX1 will cost you well over £7,000. Bear in mind, though, that no all-electric Renault includes the cost of its battery in the asking price. For that, you've got to take out a separate battery rental agreement with Renault, the cost of which will vary depending on your projected annual mileage and your planned ownership period. Now, to give you some idea of what those costs might be, at launch, 3-year figures varied anything between £45 and £57 a month, based on annual mileages of between 4.5 and 9,000 miles. So in other words, you've got to budget at least probably another couple of £1,000 for 3 years of motoring, just to allow for the battery. The model range is fairly simple, with a few trim levels that really aren't that different from one another. The motive power remains the same, it's just that as you ascend the lineup, you end up with gear like alloy wheels, floor mats and metallic paint. Now, the entry-level model is really all that most will need. Well, that and a pair of doors. It comes with things like the essential 3-metre long charge cable, lateral wind deflectors, an engine immobiliser and waterproof seat coverings. On the modest option list, you'll find that most essential of features for a car of this kind, a bespoke blanket. The French call them jupes or skirts, to keep your unmentionables warm on a cold January morning. You might also want to look at the lovely Clearview panoramic glass roof, or the Parrot Bluetooth kit, so you can natter on the phone as you drive. Plus, of course, you can specify alloy wheels and metallic paint if your required trim level doesn't have them. As for safety, well, I really wouldn't want to have a serious accident in a Twizy. But were that to happen, I'd be reassured by standards of safety that Renault say aren't that far removed from any of their other passenger cars. The French brand says it subjected this design to all the safety tests it would normally conduct, just at a slightly lower speed. Now, bear in mind that this car doesn't have stability, traction control or anti-lock brakes, so you'll need to be a little circumspect when it's slippery outside. But if the worst should happen, there's a driver's airbag, that 4-point seat belt and an anti-submarining front seat design to stop you squirming under your belts in the event of a collision. When discussing cost of ownership figures for this Twizy, it all gets a bit how long is a piece of string. Clearly, the range you get out of this Renault will depend very much on your driving style, while your electricity bills will depend on the cost effectiveness of your supplier. Still, let's try and give you some idea. Let's say that you drive this thing in a heroically eco-minded manner and get 40 miles out of a single charge, and that your average weekly commute is around 100 miles. Now, an average UK electricity tariff will see you paying about £1.50 to charge up this model from empty. So in so-called fuel terms, your average weekly spend will be no more than about £4. Sounds good, doesn't it? But remember that to that, you've to add around £13 a week, maybe more, for the battery rental contract that must be taken out in conjunction with Twizy purchase. And on top of that, you've probably got slightly higher insurance premiums to pay. The industry has unfairly rated this Renault at groups 10 or 11. And all of that means that your normal weekly running cost isn't going to be very much different from that you pay for a conventional city car. But don't give up yet, because there are many other factors to take into account when it comes to calculating overall total ownership costs. For a start, this Twizy will be cheaper to buy than most ordinary little runabouts. And if you're a company car driver, you'll be paying 0% benefit-in-kind tax on it. For companies, there's also a 100% first-year allowance, which enables them to claim the cost of buying this Renault against corporation tax in the first year of ownership. And maintenance costs will be about 20% lower than they would be for a normal combustion engine model. You won't have to replace a timing belt, an air filter or a fuel filter, for example. And of course, no oil changes are required. Not that you'll need to worry too much about that, for this Renault is covered by the 4 Plus package, which gives you 4 years or 48,000 miles of free routine servicing. Now, this can be at any Renault dealer, but your ideal ownership partner will be one of the specialist Renault ZE sales and service centres dotted around the country. There were 22 at the time of this vehicle's launch. Where this Twizy scores another knockout blow is if your commute takes you over toll bridges. There'll normally be no charge, or into congestion zones. London, for example, offers 100% congestion charge exemption, and as a further bonus, Westminster City Council will give you 4 hours of free parking plus a number of charging points. Renault still, though, hasn't fully got its head around the fact that most urban drivers have to leave their cars parked out on the streets. so have no practical way of recharging them from a home power point. Now, to be fair, the French brand can't do much about that. It has, however, gone the extra mile as far as it can for ownership peace of mind. So the battery rental contract includes a free roadside assistance package that'll tow you to the nearest charging point should you find yourself stranded by the side of the road. This vehicle has a 4-year, 100,000 mile warranty, and the electric drivetrain has a 5-year, 100,000 mile warranty. Plus, you get a guarantee that the battery will always give you at least 75% of its original charge capacity. Batteries deteriorate over time, you see. Apple founder Steve Jobs always contended that product development shouldn't be based around asking people what they wanted. Nothing really new ever gets invented that way. No, forward thinking demands that you look at a problem, in this case the way that the automobile industry accounts for 25% of the world's oil consumption and ramps up climate change by pushing out 12% of global CO2, and design a unique solution. Well, this Twizy is certainly unique. It isn't intended to be an only car, to cover long distances, or even to be especially practical, which is great. After all, it's precisely because conventional city cars try to make themselves at least some of these things that they're less economic than for the future they will need to be. If you spend your life nipping around town but can't bring yourself to buy the scooter that you know in your heart of hearts would make more sense, then this Renault offers the answer. And unlike most sensible solutions, it's affordable, it's desirable, and it's fantastic fun. A scooter for people who like cars, or a car for people who like scooters? I'm not sure which, but the definition doesn't matter. The end result does. The future redefined.